All right. Hello. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone in person and online joining us today. Just a quick housekeeping note or two. You who are online will notice the chat is open. We really like to keep that open for free-flowing conversation. Feel free to keep using it. Do introduce yourself if you haven't done so already. But also, please note, if you have a question that you want a panelist or a host to answer, please use the Q&A function for today's webinar so that we see your question and answer it. And as we kick off with today's first fireside chat, we have very limited time. I probably won't be able to open the floor to questions from the audience during this upcoming session, but put your questions there. I will do my best to answer them after we've concluded our fireside chat, and Beth may be able to stay on for a minute or two to help field questions as well. So with that, Beth Goldberg, good morning. Where are you joining us from today?
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's balmy and warm here in New York City this morning.
And gorgeous here in Menlo Park, California, too. So,
And
Beth.
it's not gorgeous here.
Yeah.
It's like disgustingly humid and
Oh, sorry to hear it. Sorry to hear it. Um, Beth, you are a senior fellow at the Yale Jackson School of Global Affairs. You're the head of research and development at Jigsaw, which is a Google unit that explores both the opportunity and the risk dimensions of advanced technologies and especially AI. From your groundbreaking work with the Perspectives API to some of your more recent focus on AI sense making in deliberative technology, you and the Jigsaw team have really helped our ecosystem to see and to stretch our sense of what's possible. Many of us already know you as an industry leader who collaborates very generously with civil society organizations around the world, including our project team at the Forum, which I'll be talking about later today in a session with Andrew Hsu. Thanks so much for serving as an advisor on that project. We're really grateful to have you with us today to help set the tone for our focus on intentional design. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin. It's really an honor to be here. I have been one of those avid readers of the Tech and Social Cohesion Substack and a big fan of all of the work that you all do. I've been lucky enough to collaborate with many of you. So it was a real joy when you reached out and said, "Do you want to have a fireside chat?" I was
Yeah,
like, absolutely. In front of
great.
people by ourselves, I would love to chat with you anytime.
Great. Terrific. Well, we are going to put you to work. We'd like you to kind of help set the tone for today's event. And the main provocation of the event is that if we want to deliver digital interactions that foster peace and collaboration instead of driving conflict and polarization, we have to move upstream. Instead of just mitigating the downstream harm as it happens, we can and we must design more intentionally to prevent the harm from happening in the first place, right? But I would contend that moving upstream is tough without the industry's commitment to that idea. So, before we talk about some of Google Jigsaw's specific efforts around this, would you mind giving us kind of a broader industry insider view on this? What kind of conversation, if any, is happening inside the tech industry about designing intentionally for more constructive, less harmful interactions? Is that even a thing?
Yeah, it is luckily a thing. And I really appreciate this provocation. You all are definitely on the tip of the spear, so it's not happening everywhere. And I also can't speak for the entire tech industry. I certainly have collaborators and research partners across industry, but I'll offer you three observations that I've had about places where this sort of intentional, more pro-social design is happening
Terrific.
inside of industry. And I think these are really serving as points for emulation and points for sort of cross-industry collaboration. The first is this sort of safety by design or security by design movement. And I see that in particular as a core principle of what my colleagues in Google Trust and Safety are doing. It's really what they think of as the top of the funnel. And they do have like a funnel diagram where the top line of the funnel says safety by design. And that means that they're putting a ton of investment into proactive abuse mitigation, everything from sort of different specialized LLM classifiers to having sort of privacy by default settings for people, multi-factor authentication. And think also about like disclosures and making sure that people are aware, hey, this content is AI generated, or hey, if you share this, it will be public, that sort of thing. So safety by design, I think, is really starting to become more of an industry standard, sometimes also called security by design. The second really interesting one that is a cross-industry initiative about intentional design is called the C2PA, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. I had to look that one up this morning. But C2PA does amazing work, and they have, at this point, a couple thousand members, everything from media organizations to the Googles and the Microsofts. And they're really trying to set an open technical standard for publishers, for creators, and for consumers to know, hey, what is the origin of this piece of digital content? Can we all get on the same page about stamping an image from a journalist, stamping an image that you generated with an AI generating tool with the same set of metadata? They call it content credentials, which I think is a really understandable, straightforward name, and ensure that, as the digital ecosystem evolves, we're all sort of able to read the same cues about what is content, where is it coming from? So provenance transparency is a super cool movement. And the last point I'll say on intentional design, I've been really excited by design for community moderators. Think like the stewards of subreddits, of discords, even creators who have their own very large channels on like a Steam or a YouTube. We often think only about the platform employees as having these moderation goals, ad hoc removing content and things, but there's actually a lot of intentional design going into tooling for much more customizable moderation. If your particular community on Discord only wants to have certain types of conversations and not others, there's now a lot more LLM-powered tools for that. And my team actually did a big ethnography with these community mods a few years ago. And one of the things that stuck with me is that all of these moderators, the people who are really making the best parts of the internet, they're spending way more time and energy than they want shielding their community from, as they put it, sort of like the garbage of the internet. And they'd had a bunch of these ad hoc tools like Perspective API that you mentioned, which identifies toxicity, but they really wanted to have, something that did a lot more of it for them and was much more customizable for their community. And so I've been really excited in the last year or so. We're seeing a bunch of cool new tools, things like Zentropy and others that allow for customizable moderation for communities by their community stewards.
Yeah, and on that last point about community moderation, it makes me think about the work of New Public and Plurality Institute, for example, really advancing these concepts in online spaces, Reddit and elsewhere. So yeah, okay, so just to kind of recap on that, safety by design, C2PA, provenance, and supporting community moderators in doing their job efficiently and well. So yeah, that's great. I'm sure there are a lot of threads to pick up on there. So again, I just want to encourage our audience to go ahead and submit questions to the Q&A, and we'll get to them as fast as we can. So what I'd love to do now, though, is turn to Google Jigsaw and provide a little bit of a platform for your work. Not only are you and your team real collaborators, and not only do you exemplify that spirit of upstream intentional design, but you're bringing all this juju to a space that I know a lot of people in this audience are really invested in now and excited about. And I'm talking about deliberative technology and democracy, right? So please share. How did your team decide to back deliberative projects like What Could Bowling Green Be in Warren County, Kentucky, and We the People 250, a national deliberation on American values? What did you think you could bring, and what did you hope to show?
Yeah. So back in 2024, we started to reorient the way that Jigsaw was structured, and we wanted to focus on building technology that advanced human agency. And when we looked around and said, where are these real deficits of agency? One universal answer was affecting political institutions, actually having representatives that listen to us, that actually represent us, right? And so we thought, is there something that we could build that would enhance people's sense of agency over their own sort of political representation? And we were really inspired by so much deliberative technology work that has come before us. I mean, this movement has been building for over a decade. And as we were looking for where we could plug in, I'll be honest, Bowling Green, Kentucky was not on our bingo cards at all.
But I'm glad that changed.
Yeah, me too. It was an amazing experience. Some partners reached out to us and said, hey, there's this mayor here who, and a set of local leaders that are really keen to use technology to listen to their constituents. They've got this aspiration for a 2050 plan. Could you help us?
Right.
And I thought that was an incredible opening and a sign of sort of mission alignment and an openness to experimentation. And so we, a whole group of us New Yorkers from tech, all in our black, we fly down to Kentucky and we're like, hey, we're going to solve all your problems with AI. We didn't actually say that, but there was sort of this fun, culture clash moment. And we very quickly were like, oh, we actually have very similar missions here. Of trying to understand how can we help the public exercise more agency and ultimately shape policy here. And so 9 months of sort of very intentional co-design and collaboration with the local community and local leadership there resulted in a month-long open deliberation on the Polis platform, along with some new bespoke tech that our team at Jigsaw built. And we had over 8,000 participants. That was over 10% of the town participate, which at the time was the largest digital town hall in America. And I just want to say, thrilled to note that you, Kristin, and your team surpassed that recently with a massive deliberation in South Carolina. So
but we did have a whole state. We had a whole state to draw on. So
yes, amazing though to have that record shattered. So spectacular that you had almost 50,000. But I think that experiment proved to us that there was hunger for this, there was appetite. We could feed public sentiment directly back into policymaking processes. There have been a couple pieces of policy now changed in Bowling Green. And we said, okay, what would it look like to do that in an even more heterogeneous environment? Could we do this with the whole country? And so rather than open it up to an open call, this time we designed like a more representative sample of 2,400 Americans last fall in something called We the People. And it was really remarkable to us the way that the AI is allowing us to have these really diverse, heterogeneous conversations about things that are a little spicy. We were able to really get at what are some of the foundational core principles that Americans agree on. And what the AI was able to do through a couple rounds of interaction was illuminate what was otherwise like hidden common ground, hidden consensus, and be able to elevate those particular policy statements that had, 80% or more agreement. And so we've open sourced these tools. If you Google Jigsaw sense making, you'll see them there. We've got a lovely new website. And we've been working on making them interoperable now with different platforms and partners so that they can help us refine and really scale these to all different contexts all around the world.
Something I wanted to drill down on a little bit, Beth, about the We the People 250 initiative is this idea of how a respondent interacts with the technology and whether the term smart elicitation is something that's on your radar or how you would describe that interaction. Because I think a space that seems to be unpacking right now is the idea that where we're all accustomed to more static polling as a way to determine whether there's common ground, as you pointed out, that you can use a more iterative process with AI to just keep digging deeper. Can you talk a little bit about how that worked or how you see that working in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So as people become more familiar with sort of chatbot style interfaces and going back and forth with an agent asking you questions, we were able to put a wrapper around some of that chatbot technology and bring it into this deliberation. So we had a first static question, what do you want to see in your town in 2050 or something like that? And then we would get sometimes a few words, maybe a whole sentence at the most, but then we were able to have the AI generate a follow-up question and actually ask the person, can you elaborate on that? Can you explain how you would prioritize this against something else? Or we would just ask them, often if it was in a deliberative context, can you explain why that's important to you from your own personal experience? And actually having someone ground their answer in a personal story, in a personal experience. And, my uncle has this particular condition, or I had this particular experience losing my job. Yeah. That was both so grounding for the information about why this person cared about that policy issue. But then when we aggregated and shared those quotes with different members of the public with one another, it humanized perspectives that they might disagree with. And it was saying, oh, wow, people feel that way because they've had this particular really human experience of losing their job. And so I thought it was really profound. And it also took us from, 10-word answers to closer to on average 100-word answers. So just in terms of the amount of nuance that you're able to get from people, this intelligent elicitation or smart elicitation of a single follow-up question or two really just enriched the data set so much for us and illuminated so much more of that common ground.
And common ground, but also the ability to generate connection, empathy, and understanding, right? And to counterpoint those two projects, what could Bowling Green be? Intensely local, big ground game, right? Lots of folks fanned out across that county. and promoting this deliberative project. On the other hand, We the People 250, all online, all digital. So different challenges, right? How you bring the human forward in a tech forward process. So super interesting. Beth, we're
Yeah.
almost out of time. I would love to kind of put the crystal ball in front of you and give you an opportunity to share what you see coming on the horizon, especially for Google Jigsaw, but any prognosticating you want to do in the area of deliberative technology and democracy and what the future looks like for Google Jigsaw. Last word.
Yeah, there's so much momentum in this space and so much untapped potential. And so for all of you in this room and online, I think deliberative democracy, we are scratching the surface.
Yeah.
At Jigsaw, we're exploring a number of these technical questions that I think we can uniquely contribute back to the field. Things like, how do you use different modalities with text and audio and video together in the right moments in ways that help people feel privacy protected, but also like you're building empathy with other people's perspectives. We're trying to weave together different phases of dialogue so you can have more open and more small group conversations. And then we're also looking at how do you integrate expert input? How do you integrate other sources of data? In terms of the big trends and opportunities I'm excited about, I'll just say this idea of government innovation is really bipartisan in the US, and it's also like a requisite globally for institutions to both maintain and maybe even potentially rebuild some of the plummeting trust that we have in institutions, right? We really need to be investing in innovation. And so because of that, we're actually seeing so much demand from leaders, whether that's elected state officials, city level officials, folks in other parts of the administration. They're really hungry to say, what does the public want and how can I be responsive to them in a much more effective, lightweight way? And they want to show that they're using AI in a smart way, right? They're under pressure to be using technology as well. And so I think some of these deliberative technology tools are really going to meet a demand both from the public to feel more heard and from these policymakers to be able to be more responsive in an AI era.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. That's right. The projects we're seeing in the US specifically, but of course all over the world, emanate at times from the people, from the public, and at other times from an enlightened body of elected leaders. And either way can work, right? But the fact that the demand is coming from both sides of the equation maybe gives us our best shot.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, I just wanted to check with our hosts and with Trini. Big shout out to Trini Reynoso, by the way, who's been the wizard behind the curtain, making today's events really successful. Do we have our next speakers ready to go? If so, Beth and I will gracefully exit the stage, and if not, I might take one or two questions from the Q&A.
Let's take one or two questions, Kristin. We ran over a bit in our welcome remarks, so we can give you that.
Okay. I was just checking because it looked like maybe we were still waiting on the next group to come. So yeah, I do see in the Q&A, Craig, thanks for your questions. They're kind of related, so I'll see if I can combine them gracefully here. But, Craig asked a couple of questions in the chat about how these pro-social dimensions of AI and LLMs can compete against what we all know to be the traditional monetizing model of engaging, enraging, going for eyeballs. The question here specifically says, I love what Jigsaw is doing, but how do we scale this in a world where if it divides, it leads, if it bleeds, it leads, and that's the norm. Do you see this changing? I know some people speculate that as we move from a social media feed-based orientation to more of a personalized agentic AI orientation, that could be our salvation, but I'm sure I'm oversimplifying. What gives you hope?
Wow. Okay. A lot of different questions and directions I could take that. I think the question of moving away from engagement-based models and moving more towards agentic models is already happening and gives me a lot of optimism around moving away from things that are just purely polarizing. Unfortunately, I do think we might be moving toward a world of more echo chambers. And so that makes this sort of deliberative technology all the more important for us to be able to not only feel that we have influence and voice and agency, but also to feel like we actually understand what other people around us in our communities are thinking and that we have belonging. So
yeah, that those environments are intentionally cross-cutting, right? And how do you set that up? Yeah.
I think right now we can get a pulse on how we belong in community from Facebook groups and Discord servers and the different online communities that we're in. But those tend to be, to use the Eli Pariser phrase, sort of filter bubbles, little echo chambers. And I think there's some small social media platforms. Shout out to Roundabout, created by New Public, that are trying to intentionally use some of these pro-social design tools, including LLM-based tools, to get us away from that old version of social media. But in terms of actually scaling deliberation, this is where I don't think it's ever going to be profitable per se to be having, the public wrestle with policy decisions. But it's the type of thing that if we can make it low cost enough, it can replace some of the outdated and ineffective current expenses that governments are already spending on things like surveys or focus groups that aren't delivering exactly what they actually need, which is timely, diverse, heterogeneous and actionable policy ideas. I think we're doing that much better already with deliberative tech. So if we can reappropriate some of those budgets within government, that's one way to scale it. I think philanthropy is another really exciting way to scale it. And then groups like Jigsaw, who have aligned incentives to say, we're a nonprofit, we're an incubator of cool new ideas. Can we come alongside those of you who have mission alignment and try to help you scale?
Yeah, well, to that end, and again, folks, cut me off if we're going too far past our time, but we've had a great question come into Q&A. Macias, I'm sorry if I'm mangling your name, but a great question coming, I think, from outside the US, writing to explore how we might reappropriate AI to effectively serve peace building efforts, especially when these technologies are often not designed or trained with the cultural and social subtleties of the global South.
And
Insights.
Kristin,
Yeah.
could I maybe also have the chance for someone in the room, if they have a question, to tack on one, and then Beth could answer both?
Yeah, as long as Beth has time. I know we're, again, we're past our
I don't want to
scheduled
run
time.
over.
So
Yeah.
okay. Great. That'd be great. Let's do this one and then we'll go to the room. Terrific. So the questioner is asking for your insights, Beth, on how we address design gaps to make AI more inclusive and effective. And obviously, Jigsaw acts and thinks globally, so I'm sure you have some perspective on this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the question was also about peace building, and I will just acknowledge there are so many people in this room and on this call that have way more expertise in peace building than I do. But one idea that I'll offer from Lisa Shirk, who's another collaborator with the council and a collaborator of ours at Jigsaw, is that we need to be able to visualize what that common ground and what that depolarization could look like from these conversations that we're having, right? I think a lot of times peace building conversations, these dialogues, they sort of happen in a black box. And then, maybe a shiny report comes back and it gets shared with the, high level decision makers. But we actually need to be mirroring back to people. You are part of this plurality. It has a diversity of perspectives, but actually you belong in this big cohesive middle and you share a lot of things cross-cutting along different demographics and things like that. And so I think we're maybe underutilizing some of the new data visualization opportunities that we have and some of the ways to share back information very easily with people once they participate in these dialogues and say, you're part of this community. Here's where you are in the landscape of opinions. You actually have so much in common, so much more in common than you think. This is really closing that perception gap of thinking that we have, such stark polarized differences. In terms of cultural contexts, this is really where we need to be building open source tools that can be contextualized to different places and where we need to be co-designing. You all have heard this expression a million times. It's very trendy to say co-design. It's really hard to do co-design. It's very resource intensive, especially when you're co-designing with really heterogeneous communities. In Bowling Green, we were co-designing alongside the Republican local leadership, but we also had the local university. We had local immigrant groups. We had, the retirement communities. We had all different perspectives and voices and ages and technological sophistication levels. And we really needed to co-design with all of them, which added time and resources to the project, but ultimately is what made it so effective. And so I would say, coming alongside local partners and a real plurality of local partners is there's no silver bullet, but that's the best approach I've seen.
And of course, when it comes to deliberative technology, democracy, citizens' assemblies, the fact is, the world is leading and the US is lagging. So there is a lot of rich insight that's being developed and baked into these platforms by virtue of the fact that so much of the innovation is not happening in the US where you and I are, Beth, but all over the world. And again, in the session I'll be rejoining for later in the day, we'll do our best to describe how that ecosystem is building and flourishing, and that wave is cresting now in the U.S. It's exciting to see it happening here, but most of the inspiration has been coming from outside the U.S. for a long time. So that's great. Nick, in the room.
Any questions from folks in the room? No? They're so blown away. They have no questions.
Well, and I see that Nick and Ash, or Gabe and Asha are on now, Nick.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
so that must be our cue. I just want
Yeah.
to thank you, Beth, so much for being with us today. I know how much everyone appreciated. Thanks to those of you who posed questions to us. And Beth, have a great day.